They whispered she belonged in a flower shop, not a forward operating base. Her voice never rose above conversation level. She helped injured sparrows in the courtyard, and when tensions flared, she was the one offering water bottles and asking if everyone was okay. The hardened soldiers at Camp Riverside thought Maya Chen was the softest person they'd ever seen in uniform. What they didn't know was that those small silver wings pinned quietly on her jacket told a story that would soon turn their world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chen arrived at Camp Riverside on a Tuesday morning when the desert heat was already making the asphalt shimmer. She stepped off the transport truck with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a worn leather journal clutched in her other hand. Her uniform was regulation, clean and pressed, but something about the way she carried herself made the other soldiers do double takes. She moved with an unusual gentleness for someone in military fatigues. When Corporal Jake Morrison accidentally bumped into her while unloading supplies, she immediately apologized, even though it wasn't her fault. When Private Lisa Rodriguez dropped her water bottle and it rolled under a nearby Humvee, Maya was the one who crawled underneath to retrieve it, emerging with dusty knees and a genuine smile. The first impression spread through the base like wildfire. During her initial check-in at the administrative office, Staff Sergeant Tom Bradley noticed how she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she answered his questions. Name, rank, previous assignment. Each response came out so softly that he had to lean forward to hear her properly. "You're going to need to speak up around here, soldier," Bradley said, not unkindly. "This isn't a library." Maya nodded with that same gentle expression. "Yes, Sergeant, I understand." But even her acknowledgement was delivered in that same quiet tone that made everyone wonder if she'd accidentally wandered into the wrong career field. Her bunk assignment placed her in Barracks C with 12 other soldiers, most of them combat veterans who had seen action in 3 different theaters. The contrast was immediately apparent. While her bunkmates swapped war stories and debated tactical approaches over card games, Maya sat cross-legged on her cot, writing in her journal or reading paperback novels with flowers on the covers. During her first meal in the mess hall, the differences became even more pronounced. The dining area was filled with the usual military banter, loud conversations about training exercises, complaints about MREs, and good-natured ribbing between units. Maya found a corner table and ate her food in silence, occasionally glancing up to observe the room, but never joining the conversation swirling around her. Staff Sergeant Rachel Winters from the adjacent table caught herself watching Maya throughout the meal. There was something almost ethereal about the way the new soldier carried herself. She cut her food into small, precise pieces. She chewed slowly. When someone's tray clattered to the floor 3 tables over, Maya flinched slightly, not from surprise, but from what looked like genuine concern for whoever had made the mistake. "She acts like she's afraid of her own shadow," Private Danny Foster muttered to his tablemates. "How'd someone like that make it through basic training?" The speculation continued throughout Maya's first week. During physical training, she kept pace with the group, but never pushed to be first in line or fastest to finish. When drill instructor Sergeant Kevin Walsh shouted commands, she followed them precisely, but without the aggressive energy that usually characterized military exercises. Her push-ups were technically perfect, but performed with an almost meditative calm that unnerved some of the other recruits. The most telling moment came during weapons training. As soldiers lined up at the shooting range, there was the usual competitive atmosphere. Jokes about who would have the highest score, bets placed on accuracy, the familiar sound of soldiers psyching themselves up for the exercise. Maya took her position at lane 7, adjusted her protective gear, and waited for instructions. When the targets popped up, the range exploded with gunfire. Soldiers emptied their magazines with varying degrees of enthusiasm and skill. Maya's shots came in measured intervals, not slow enough to fall behind the pace, but without the rapid-fire aggression that characterized most of her peers. When the exercise concluded and targets were retrieved for scoring, there was a moment of confused silence. Maya's target showed a tight grouping that would have impressed any instructor. Every shot within the highest scoring rings, the kind of accuracy that usually came from years of dedicated practice. But she'd achieved it with the same calm demeanor she brought to everything else. No celebration, no acknowledgement of her superior performance, just a quiet nod when Sergeant Walsh announced her score. "Beginner's luck," someone whispered, though the explanation didn't quite fit the precision of the results. The contradictions continued to mount. Maya volunteered for extra kitchen duty, spending her free time helping prepare meals and clean equipment. She was always the first to offer assistance when someone struggled with their gear. During a particularly difficult night navigation exercise, she quietly guided 2 lost soldiers back to the correct path without making them feel incompetent about their mistake. But it was the small moments that really defined how others saw her. One evening, as soldiers gathered around the barracks for their usual post-training conversations, Maya noticed an injured bird near the building's entrance. While others stepped around it or ignored it completely, she knelt down and carefully examined the creature. Using a small first aid kit from her personal supplies, she fashioned a makeshift splint for what appeared to be a damaged wing. "You know that thing's probably going to die anyway," Private Foster said, not cruelly, but with the practical mindset that military life tends to foster. Maya looked up at him with those soft eyes. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to help." She spent the next 3 days checking on the bird, bringing it water and small pieces of food from her own meals. When it finally flew away, she watched from the barracks window with a smile that transformed her entire face. Several soldiers who witnessed this exchange found themselves reconsidering their initial impressions, but they couldn't quite articulate why. The gentle contradictions extended to her personal space as well. Maya's bunk area was meticulously organized, but not in the harsh military precision way that characterized most soldiers' quarters. Her few personal belongings were arranged with an aesthetic sensibility: a small succulent plant in a tin cup, photographs arranged not just for functionality but for visual appeal, books stacked in a way that created pleasing lines and colors. Her jacket hung on its designated hook, looking identical to every other uniform jacket in the barracks. Regulation green, standard issue buttons, name tape properly aligned. The only distinguishing feature was a small pair of silver wings pinned above the left pocket. Most soldiers assumed they were some kind of graduation pin or training achievement award, the kind of ceremonial decoration that looked official but didn't carry much significance. Nobody bothered to look closely. Nobody asked what they represented. In an environment where combat patches, deployment ribbons, and service medals told the real story of a soldier's experience, Maya's quiet little wings seemed almost quaint, like something you might find in a gift shop rather than something earned through legitimate military service. As her second week at Camp Riverside began, Maya had settled into a routine that reinforced every initial impression. She woke early and made her bunk with corners so sharp they could cut glass. She helped slower soldiers with their equipment checks. She ate her meals quietly, wrote in her journal during free time, and never raised her voice even when others around her were shouting.
The base had reached a consensus. Maya Chen was too soft for this environment. She was kind, competent in a basic sense, and clearly well-meaning, but she lacked the edge that military life demanded, the hardness that separated soldiers from civilians, the killer instinct that made the difference between surviving combat and becoming a casualty. What none of them realized was that those small silver wings represented something far more significant than any of them had imagined. And very soon, circumstances would arise that would reveal exactly what Maya Chen was truly capable of when the situation demanded it. The stage was set for a revelation that would shake every assumption they'd made about the quiet woman who preferred flowers to firearms, who spoke in whispers instead of shouts, and who seemed to carry the concerns of the entire world in her gentle brown eyes. 3 weeks into Maya's assignment at Camp Riverside, the base received orders for a large-scale training exercise that would push every soldier to their limits. Operation Desert Shield was designed to simulate real combat conditions over a grueling 4-day period in the unforgiving Nevada landscape. The exercise would test everything from individual survival skills to unit cohesion under extreme stress. Captain Sarah Martinez, the commanding officer overseeing the operation, gathered all participating soldiers in the main briefing room. The space buzzed with nervous energy as experienced soldiers shared knowing glances and newer recruits tried to mask their anxiety. Maya sat in her usual position near the back, notebook open, pen ready. "This isn't going to be your typical training exercise," Captain Martinez announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "You'll be operating with limited supplies, minimal sleep, and constant pressure from opposing forces. Some of you will discover strengths you didn't know you had. Others will learn exactly where your breaking point lies." The exercise would divide the soldiers into teams of 8, each responsible for completing a series of objectives while avoiding capture by the enemy forces, experienced soldiers from a neighboring base who specialized in these kinds of war games. The teams would be dropped at different locations in the desert, equipped with basic survival gear, and expected to navigate to their targets using only map and compass navigation. When team assignments were announced, Maya found herself grouped with 7 soldiers who represented a cross-section of Camp Riverside's personality types. There was Corporal James Mitchell, a by-the-book leader who approached every situation with textbook military precision. Private Angela Torres brought an aggressive competitive streak that made her volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. Staff Sergeant Mike Johnson was the group's combat veteran, having served 2 tours overseas and earned a reputation for keeping his soldiers alive under fire. The team also included Private First Class David Kim, whose technical expertise with communications equipment was legendary throughout the base. Specialist Jennifer Walsh had proven herself as the fastest runner in the unit and could navigate difficult terrain with mountain goat-like agility. Private Marcus Thompson was the group's heavy weapons specialist, capable of carrying equipment loads that would crush most people. Finally, Corporal Lisa Park rounded out the team with her medical training and calm demeanor under pressure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maya's inclusion in this group raised some eyebrows among the other soldiers. During the pre-exercise briefing, she could hear whispered conversations questioning whether someone with her gentle disposition would be able to handle the intensity of the training. Some expressed concern that she might become a liability when the pressure mounted. "I just hope she doesn't slow us down," Private Torres muttered to her friends, loud enough for Maya to overhear. "This isn't the time for hand-holding and group therapy sessions." Maya gave no indication that she'd heard the comment. She continued reviewing the maps and mission parameters with the same quiet focus she brought to every task. But Corporal Mitchell noticed something in her expression, a subtle shift that suggested she was processing more than just geographical information. The teams were transported to their starting positions at dawn on a Thursday morning. Maya's team found themselves deposited in a rocky canyon approximately 15 miles from their primary objective, a communications relay station they needed to capture without being detected by the defending forces. The secondary objectives included establishing a temporary base camp, gathering intelligence on enemy patrol patterns, and maintaining radio silence for the first 24 hours. As soon as the transport helicopter disappeared over the horizon, the team's dynamics began to reveal themselves. Corporal Mitchell immediately assumed command and began issuing orders based on standard operating procedures he'd memorized from field manuals. Private Torres started scouting potential routes toward the objective, her energy and enthusiasm evident in every movement. Staff Sergeant Johnson methodically checked equipment and weapons, his experienced eyes scanning for potential problems before they became critical issues. Maya positioned herself slightly apart from the group's initial huddle, not in a way that suggested isolation, but with the kind of spatial awareness that allowed her to observe the entire team while remaining unobtrusive. She pulled out her map and began making small marks with a pencil, cross-referencing the terrain features visible around them with the contour lines and elevation markers on the paper. "Chen, what are you doing over there?" Mitchell called out. "We need to move out in 5 minutes." "Just checking our position against the map," Maya replied in her characteristic soft voice. "I think the helicopter dropped us about 300 meters south of where they intended." Mitchell walked over to examine Maya's work. Her map showed precise notations indicating their actual location based on triangulation from visible landmarks. The correction was significant enough to affect their planned route to the objective. "How can you be sure?" Mitchell asked, though his tone suggested he was taking her observation seriously. Maya pointed to a distinctive rock formation visible to their northwest, then traced her finger along the map to show how its position relative to other terrain features indicated their true location. Her analysis was methodical and detailed, incorporating elements of the landscape that others had overlooked. Staff Sergeant Johnson joined the conversation, studying Maya's calculations with the kind of attention that came from years of field experience. "She's right," he said after a few moments. "This changes our approach angle to the objective." The teams gathered around Maya's map as she explained the implications of their actual position. Her voice remained soft, but her analysis was thorough and precise. She had identified not only their true location, but also several tactical considerations that would affect their mission planning. Alternative routes that would provide better concealment, water sources that weren't marked on the standard issue maps, potential observation points that could give them intelligence advantages. "How did you spot all this so quickly?" Specialist Walsh asked, genuinely curious. Maya shrugged slightly. "I spent a lot of time studying topographical maps during my previous assignment. You start to notice patterns in how terrain features relate to each other." The team adjusted their plan based on Maya's input and began moving toward their objective. The initial phase of movement proved challenging as they navigated rough terrain while carrying full combat loads. The Nevada desert presented a hostile environment with temperature extremes, limited water sources, and terrain that could turn an ankle or shred equipment without warning. Maya's performance during this phase surprised several team members. While she maintained her characteristically quiet demeanor, she moved through the difficult terrain with an efficiency that spoke of extensive experience. She chose foot placements that minimized noise and avoided loose rocks that could cause slides. When the team needed to cross a particularly treacherous section of broken ground, Maya identified the safest route and led the way with sure-footed confidence. Private Torres, who had been skeptical of Maya's inclusion in the team, found herself watching the smaller woman with growing respect. "She moves like she's done this before," Torres mentioned to Private Thompson during a brief rest stop. The first real test came when the team encountered an unexpected obstacle, a deep ravine that hadn't been clearly marked on their maps. The standard solution would have been to follow the ravine until they found a suitable crossing point, but that would have added several hours to their timeline and potentially exposed them to enemy observation. As the team leaders debated their options, Maya studied the ravine with intense concentration. She walked along the edge for about 50 meters, examining the rock formations and vegetation patterns. After several minutes of silent observation, she returned to the group. "There's a way across about 30 meters north of here," she said quietly. "It's not obvious from this angle, but there's a natural bridge formed by fallen rocks. It'll support our weight if we cross one at a time." Corporal Mitchell looked skeptical. "How can you be sure?" Maya's response revealed a depth of knowledge that caught everyone off guard. She explained how the specific type of rock formation indicated structural integrity, how the vegetation patterns suggested the bridge had been in place for an extended period, and how the erosion patterns around the base showed it had weathered previous flash floods without shifting. Staff Sergeant Johnson studied Maya with new interest as she spoke. Her analysis demonstrated a level of fieldcraft that typically came from extensive operational experience. But according to her personnel file, she was a relatively junior soldier with no documented combat deployments. The team decided to trust Maya's assessment. One by one, they crossed the natural bridge she had identified. The crossing proved solid and stable, saving them crucial time and keeping them on track for their mission timeline. But more importantly, it established Maya as someone whose judgment could be trusted when conventional solutions weren't available. As they continued toward their objective, Maya's contributions became more frequent and more valuable. She spotted concealed enemy positions that others had missed. She identified water sources that allowed them to conserve their limited supplies. When Private Kim's radio equipment suffered damage during a difficult descent, Maya improvised a repair using materials from her personal kit that restored partial functionality. The most significant moment came during their final approach to the communications relay station. The team had spent hours observing the target from a concealed position, mapping out enemy patrol patterns and defensive positions. The station was heavily guarded, with multiple layers of security that would make a conventional assault extremely difficult. Standard military doctrine suggested several possible approaches, none of which offered a high probability of success without significant risk. The team leaders were debating these conventional options when Maya spoke up from her position at the edge of their observation post.
"There's another way," she said, her quiet voice barely audible above the desert wind. Maya had been studying the target through binoculars for over an hour, but instead of focusing on the obvious defensive positions, she had been analyzing the natural terrain features around the station. She had identified a drainage system that ran beneath the facility, a series of culverts and maintenance tunnels that weren't visible from ground level but could be inferred from the way water runoff had shaped the surrounding landscape. Her plan was audacious and required precise timing, but it offered the possibility of approaching the target from an unexpected direction. The drainage system would provide concealed movement for most of the approach, emerging at a point inside the defensive perimeter where the enemy wouldn't expect an attack. "That's incredibly risky," Mitchell pointed out. "If you're wrong about those tunnels, we could end up trapped underground with no way out." Maya nodded acknowledgement of the risk, but her confidence in the assessment was evident. "The topography doesn't lie," she said simply. "Water always finds the easiest path downhill. Those tunnels are there." Staff Sergeant Johnson made the final decision. "We go with Chen's plan." The infiltration that followed was a masterclass in tactical movement. Maya led the team through the drainage system with the kind of sure navigation that suggested she had done similar operations many times before. She anticipated every turn, every obstacle, every potential choke point. When they emerged inside the defensive perimeter exactly where she had predicted, the enemy guards were completely unprepared for an attack from that direction. The team successfully captured the communications relay station without firing a shot, completing their primary objective ahead of schedule and without alerting the wider enemy forces to their presence. As they established their temporary command post in the captured facility, there was a new atmosphere of respect surrounding Maya's contributions to the mission's success. But the most telling moment came as the team prepared to signal their success to base command. Maya was adjusting the communications equipment when Staff Sergeant Johnson approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Chen," he said quietly, "where exactly did you learn to read terrain like that?" Maya looked up from the radio controls, and for just an instant, something flickered behind her gentle eyes. Something that suggested depths of experience that her personnel file didn't reflect. "Previous assignment," she said, returning to her characteristic soft-spoken manner. "Spent a lot of time in a similar country." But Johnson had been a soldier long enough to recognize evasion when he heard it. And he had seen enough combat to know that the kind of skills Maya had displayed weren't learned during routine training exercises. As the team settled in for the night, maintaining security while awaiting extraction orders, Johnson found himself studying Maya with new eyes. The gentle demeanor was still there, the quiet voice, the concern for others' welfare. But underneath it all, he was beginning to sense something else entirely. Something that suggested Maya Chen might not be quite as soft as everyone had assumed. The second day of Operation Desert Shield brought unexpected complications that would test every soldier's limits. What had started as a controlled training exercise was about to become something far more serious, and Maya Chen would find herself facing challenges that no amount of gentle demeanor could solve through kindness alone. The morning began with an emergency briefing delivered via encrypted radio. Captain Martinez's voice crackled through the communications equipment with an urgency that immediately captured every soldier's attention. Intelligence had identified actual hostile forces operating in the training area, not the planned opposition forces, but genuine threats that had been using the remote desert region for their own illegal activities. "All training teams are to consider this a real-world situation," Martinez announced. "You are authorized to use lethal force if threatened. Repeat, this is no longer a training exercise. The transformation in the camp's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Soldiers who had been treating the exercise as an extended camping trip suddenly found themselves checking weapons with deadly seriousness. Equipment that had been handled casually was now inspected with the kind of attention to detail that could mean the difference between life and death. Maya's team received specific orders to establish an observation post on a ridge overlooking a suspected smuggling route. Their mission was to gather intelligence on hostile movement patterns and report back to base command without engaging unless directly threatened. It was the kind of assignment that required patience, discipline, and the ability to remain undetected for extended periods. The team's movement toward their assigned position revealed new aspects of Maya's capabilities that continued to surprise her teammates. As they navigated increasingly dangerous terrain, she demonstrated an almost supernatural awareness of potential threats. She spotted tripwires that others had missed, identified concealed positions that could harbor snipers, and guided the team around areas where the ground showed signs of recent disturbance. "How do you see this stuff?" Private Torres asked, after Maya had prevented her from walking into what appeared to be a camouflaged pit. Maya knelt beside the concealed trap, pointing out the subtle indicators that had caught her attention. "The vegetation pattern is wrong," she explained quietly. "Natural growth doesn't create perfect geometric shapes. When you see straight lines in nature, it usually means human interference." Staff Sergeant Johnson watched this interaction with growing fascination. Maya's explanations demonstrated not just observational skills, but a systematic understanding of enemy tactics and camouflage techniques that suggested extensive training in counter-surveillance operations. The team reached their assigned observation point just as the sun was reaching its peak intensity. The ridge provided excellent visibility over the suspected smuggling route, but it also exposed them to the full force of the desert heat. Setting up their position required careful balance between maintaining good observation angles and adequate concealment from potential threats below. Maya took charge of establishing the camouflage for their position with an efficiency that surprised everyone. She didn't ask for permission or wait for orders. She simply began arranging natural materials and equipment in ways that broke up the human silhouettes and created effective concealment. Her techniques were sophisticated, incorporating principles of visual deception that went far beyond basic military training. "Where did you learn to do that?" Corporal Mitchell asked, as he watched Maya weave desert grasses through their equipment in patterns that made their position nearly invisible from below. "Previous assignment," Maya replied, her standard evasive answer that was becoming increasingly inadequate to explain her demonstrated expertise. The first 6 hours of their observation duty passed without incident. The team maintained radio silence except for scheduled check-ins, rotating watch duties to ensure continuous surveillance while allowing soldiers to rest in the brutal heat. Maya volunteered for the longest watch periods, demonstrating an ability to remain motionless and alert for hours at a time that impressed even the most experienced soldiers. It was during her solo watch shift that Maya first spotted the hostile forces they had been warned about. 3 vehicles appeared on the distant horizon, moving along the suspected smuggling route with the kind of tactical spacing that indicated military or paramilitary training. Through her binoculars, she could see that the vehicles were heavily armed and that their occupants were conducting counter-surveillance measures as they moved. Maya's response to this sighting revealed another layer of her hidden expertise. Instead of immediately alerting the rest of the team, she spent several minutes conducting a detailed analysis of the hostile forces' composition, equipment, and movement patterns. She sketched their positions, noted their apparent organization, and began developing a tactical assessment that would prove invaluable for planning purposes. When she finally woke Staff Sergeant Johnson for his scheduled watch rotation, her briefing was comprehensive and professional. She had identified the likely command structure of the hostile force, assessed their possible capabilities, and developed recommendations for how their own team should respond to various potential scenarios.
That's not the kind of report I'd expect from someone doing their first observation mission, Johnson said quietly, studying Maya's detailed sketches and notes. Maya met his gaze steadily. "I want to make sure we get everyone home safely." The answer was honest but incomplete, and Johnson was beginning to understand that Maya's evasiveness about her background wasn't casual deflection.
It was deliberate operational security. The situation escalated dramatically when the hostile forces began moving toward the ridge where Maya's team was positioned. It became clear that their observation post had been compromised, either through detection or as part of a systematic sweep of the area. The team had minutes to decide whether to attempt extraction or prepare for contact. Corporal Mitchell wanted to follow standard evacuation procedures, withdrawing from their position and requesting immediate extraction. Private Torres argued for staying in place and calling in support from other teams in the area. The debate continued for precious seconds while the hostile forces continued their approach. Maya ended the discussion by pointing out a tactical reality that others had missed. "They're not just coming toward us," she said, studying the movement patterns through her binoculars. "They're setting up a cordon. They know exactly where we are, and they're moving to prevent our escape." Her assessment proved correct, as additional hostile forces appeared on flanking routes that would cut off the team's planned withdrawal paths. The enemy had demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that suggested professional military training and experience with small unit operations. "We're surrounded," Specialist Walsh observed, her voice tight with tension. Maya lowered her binoculars and turned to face the team. For the first time since arriving at Camp Riverside, her expression had shifted from gentle concern to something much harder and more focused. "Not surrounded," she said quietly. "Contained. There's a difference." What followed was a demonstration of tactical thinking that left no doubt about Maya's true capabilities. She quickly analyzed the enemy's positioning and identified weaknesses in their cordon that could be exploited. Her plan was complex, requiring precise timing and coordination, but it offered the team's best chance of breaking contact without casualties. "The enemy commander is thinking conventionally," Maya explained, sketching out positions on a piece of paper. "He's assuming we'll try to withdraw along our planned routes or call for extraction. He's not expecting us to move deeper into his operational area." Maya's plan called for the team to move directly toward the strongest point in the enemy cordon, using terrain features and timing to slip through a gap that would only exist for a few minutes. It was audacious to the point of seeming reckless, but her analysis of enemy psychology and tactical doctrine was convincing. "That's insane," Private Torres said. "We'd be moving right into their strongest position." "Which is exactly why it will work," Maya replied with quiet confidence. "They won't expect it, and their positioning is optimized to prevent escape, not to stop infiltration." Staff Sergeant Johnson made the decision to follow Maya's plan. The execution required splitting the team into two groups, with Maya leading the infiltration element while Johnson commanded the support group that would create diversions to cover their movement. The infiltration itself was a masterclass in small unit tactics. Maya moved through enemy positions with the kind of stealth and situational awareness that spoke of extensive operational experience. She anticipated enemy reactions, exploited blind spots in their surveillance, and guided her portion of the team through seemingly impossible gaps in the hostile cordon. When they encountered an unexpected sentry post that wasn't part of Maya's initial plan, her response revealed yet another dimension of her hidden capabilities. She neutralized the threat with techniques that were efficient, silent, and decidedly lethal, a sharp contrast to the gentle woman who had been feeding injured birds just weeks earlier. "Jesus, Maya," Private Kim whispered as they moved past the neutralized position. Maya's only response was a slight nod toward their next objective. The time for explanations would come later, if they all survived the next few hours. The team's successful breakout from the enemy cordon was just the beginning of a running battle that would test every aspect of their training and experience. The hostile forces pursued them through increasingly difficult terrain, forcing constant movement and preventing them from establishing defensive positions. During this phase of the engagement, Maya's role shifted from tactical planner to combat leader. She made split-second decisions about routes and timing that kept the team ahead of their pursuers. She coordinated their movements with hand signals that were more sophisticated than standard military communications. Most importantly, she demonstrated a level of combat awareness that allowed her to anticipate enemy actions and counter them before they became critical threats. The turning point came when the team reached a narrow canyon that offered both opportunity and extreme danger.
The terrain provided excellent defensive positions, but also created the potential for the team to become trapped if the enemy controlled the exits. Maya studied the canyon for several minutes before proposing a solution that was both brilliant and terrifying. Instead of using the canyon for defense, she wanted to use it as a trap for their pursuers. "You want us to be bait," Corporal Mitchell said, clearly uncomfortable with the level of risk involved. "I want us to control the engagement," Maya corrected. "Right now, they're dictating terms because they have superior numbers and equipment. If we can get them to fight on the ground of our choosing, we can neutralize those advantages." The plan worked with devastating effectiveness. The hostile forces, confident in their numerical superiority, followed the team into the canyon without adequate reconnaissance. Maya had positioned her soldiers to create overlapping fields of fire that turned the narrow passage into a killing zone. The brief firefight that followed demonstrated Maya's tactical expertise in its most lethal form. She coordinated the team's fire with precise timing that maximized effectiveness while minimizing exposure to return fire. Her understanding of ballistics, terrain effects, and enemy psychology was evident in every decision. When the engagement ended, the surviving hostile forces had withdrawn in disorder, leaving behind equipment and wounded that would provide valuable intelligence for base command. Maya's team had achieved a decisive tactical victory against a numerically superior enemy force. As the team established a defensive perimeter and began treating their own minor wounds, Staff Sergeant Johnson approached Maya with an expression that mixed respect with growing suspicion. "That wasn't beginner's luck," he said quietly. "That was a professional-level tactical command." Maya was cleaning her weapon with the kind of methodical attention that suggested long practice. She looked up at Johnson with those same gentle eyes, but now he could see something else behind them, a depth of experience that was impossible to ignore. "Sometimes you have to be harder than people expect," she said softly. Johnson studied her for a long moment. The gentle woman who fed birds and spoke in whispers was still there, but she coexisted with someone else entirely. Someone who could plan and execute complex tactical operations with deadly efficiency.
"Maya," he said finally, "who are you really?" But before Maya could answer, their radio crackled with an emergency transmission from base command. The situation was about to become even more complicated, and Maya Chen's true identity was about to become a matter of life and death for everyone at Camp Riverside. The emergency transmission that crackled through their radio changed everything in an instant. Colonel Robert Hayes, commanding officer of the entire regional training sector, was speaking directly to field teams, something that never happened during routine operations. His voice carried the kind of urgency that made experienced soldiers check their weapons and scan the horizon for threats. "All field teams, this is Redstone Command. We have confirmed intelligence of a high-value enemy target moving through Grid Square 77. Target is priority 1 for capture or elimination. All units are to converge on sector and establish containment. Repeat, this is not a drill." Maya's team found themselves at the center of an operation that had escalated far beyond their original mission parameters. Grid Square 77 was less than 2 kilometers from their current position, and according to their maps, the terrain between their location and the target area offered multiple approach routes that would require careful coordination to prevent the target's escape. But as other teams began reporting their positions over the radio network, it became clear that Maya's unit was the closest to the target area and would likely make first contact. The responsibility for the initial engagement was falling to a team that included soldiers who still thought of Maya as too soft for real combat operations. Staff Sergeant Johnson took charge of the team's immediate tactical planning, but Maya found herself drawn into the discussion as her demonstrated expertise became impossible to ignore. When Johnson spread their tactical map on the ground and began marking approach routes, Maya knelt beside him and began adding annotations that revealed an intimate understanding of advanced reconnaissance operations. "The target will avoid the obvious routes," she said quietly, tracing her finger along a series of minor draws and ridgelines that weren't clearly marked on the standard military maps. High-value personnel are trained to use terrain that provides concealment from aerial observation while maintaining multiple escape options. Her analysis incorporated factors that went far beyond basic infantry tactics. She considered the psychological profile of someone important enough to warrant a regional-level manhunt, the likely composition of their security detail, and the operational constraints that would influence their movement decisions. "You're talking about someone with professional training," Corporal Mitchell observed, studying Maya's tactical annotations. "I'm talking about someone who knows we're coming," Maya replied, her voice carrying a certainty that suggested she had been in similar situations before. The team's movement toward the target area revealed new dimensions of Maya's capabilities that continued to challenge every assumption her teammates had made about her. She moved through the terrain with the kind of instinctive understanding that comes from extensive field experience, anticipating obstacles and identifying opportunities that others missed. Most significantly, she began demonstrating familiarity with reconnaissance protocols that were far more sophisticated than anything taught in standard infantry training. When the team needed to establish observation of potential target routes, Maya's positioning and camouflage techniques showed the kind of expertise that typically required specialized schooling. "Chen," Private Torres said during a brief halt, "have you done this kind of thing before?" Maya was adjusting her equipment with movements that were economical and practiced. "Define this kind of thing," she replied, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what Torres was asking. The evasiveness was becoming more noticeable as Maya's demonstrated expertise became impossible to explain through conventional training backgrounds. Staff Sergeant Johnson found himself watching her with the kind of attention he usually reserved for potential threats, though in this case, his concern was about what Maya might be concealing rather than what she might do. The first confirmed sighting of the target came when Maya spotted movement in a distant ravine that other team members had dismissed as wildlife activity. Through her binoculars, she identified a small group of individuals moving with the kind of tactical discipline that confirmed they were dealing with trained personnel. 3 individuals moving in tactical formation approximately 800 meters northeast, she reported, her voice taking on the crisp professionalism of someone accustomed to delivering reconnaissance reports. "Lead element appears to be conducting counter-surveillance sweeps. Recommend we assume they have electronic detection capabilities." Her assessment proved accurate when their radio communications began experiencing interference that suggested the target group was equipped with electronic warfare equipment. Standard military radios were being jammed, forcing the team to rely on backup communication methods that required greater technical expertise to operate effectively. Maya's response to this development revealed yet another layer of her hidden training. She quickly reconfigured their communication equipment using techniques that bypassed the electronic jamming, establishing contact with both their command structure and the other teams converging on the area. "How do you know how to do that?" Private Kim asked, watching Maya manipulate radio frequencies and encryption settings with obvious familiarity. "Electronics are pretty much the same everywhere," Maya replied, though her explanation didn't address the specialized knowledge required to counter military-grade jamming equipment. The tactical situation became more complex as additional intelligence reached them through Maya's restored communications link. The high-value target was apparently a former military officer who had been selling classified information to hostile foreign governments. His capture was critical not just for prosecution purposes, but to prevent further damage to national security. More importantly for Maya's team, intelligence indicated that the target was accompanied by a security detail composed of former special operations personnel. The individuals they were being asked to capture or eliminate were not ordinary criminals. They were highly trained professionals with extensive combat experience and access to military-grade equipment. "This changes everything," Corporal Mitchell said after receiving the updated intelligence briefing. "We're not equipped to handle a professional military unit." Maya studied the tactical map with an intensity that suggested she was processing far more information than was visible on the paper. When she looked up, her expression had shifted to something harder and more focused than anyone on the team had seen before. "We don't need to outgun them," she said quietly. "We need to outthink them." The plan Maya developed over the next 20 minutes demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that left no doubt about her professional competence. She had analyzed the target's likely psychology, assessed the terrain's tactical implications, and developed a strategy that would allow their small team to engage a superior force with reasonable chances of success. The key to her plan was understanding that former special operations personnel will rely on tactics and procedures they had learned during their legitimate military service. Maya's strategy exploited the predictability of this training, using the target's professional competence against them. They'll establish security perimeters according to standard operating procedures, she explained, sketching out enemy positions on the map. That creates patterns we can exploit if we're willing to take calculated risks. Her plan required the team to split into elements that would approach the target from unexpected angles, using timing and coordination to overwhelm the security detail's ability to respond effectively. It was ambitious and dangerous, but it offered their best chance of completing the mission without casualties.
Staff Sergeant Johnson listened to Maya's tactical briefing with growing amazement. Her analysis incorporated factors that were taught only in advanced military schools: psychological operations, electronic warfare considerations, and small unit tactics that went far beyond standard infantry training. "Maya," he said finally, "that's not the kind of plan someone develops without extensive operational experience." Maya met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes you have to use everything you've learned." The implementation of Maya's plan began with her personally conducting a reconnaissance approach that would have challenged experienced special operations personnel. She moved through terrain that offered minimal concealment, approaching positions where detection would mean immediate engagement with hostile forces. Her movement techniques were flawless, the kind of instinctive stealth that comes from years of practice in similar situations. She used natural terrain features to mask her approach, timed her movements to coincide with environmental factors that would mask sound, and demonstrated an understanding of human psychology that allowed her to predict where enemy sentries would focus their attention. The intelligence she gathered during this reconnaissance confirmed her tactical analysis and provided the detailed information needed to execute the capture operation. When she returned to the team's position, her briefing was comprehensive and professional. "Target is positioned in a natural depression approximately 400 meters north of our current location," she reported. "Security detail consists of 4 individuals with professional-level positioning and equipment. They have established overlapping fields of fire but have left 2 potential approach routes that we can exploit." The execution of the capture operation showcased Maya's tactical abilities in their most impressive form. She coordinated the team's movements with hand signals and timing that demonstrated mastery of small unit tactics. Her understanding of enemy psychology allowed her to predict their responses and counter them effectively. When the engagement began, Maya's leadership was evident in every aspect of the team's performance. She had positioned each soldier to maximize their individual capabilities while creating synergistic effects that multiplied the team's overall effectiveness. The brief firefight that followed resulted in the capture of the high-value target and the neutralization of his security detail without friendly casualties. Maya's tactical plan had worked exactly as designed, achieving mission success against a professionally trained enemy force. But the most significant moment came after the engagement, when Colonel Hayes arrived by helicopter to personally oversee the target's transfer to higher authorities. As he approached the team's position, his attention was immediately drawn to Maya, who was coordinating the site security with obvious competence. "Soldier," Hayes called out, "I want to speak with whoever planned this operation." Staff Sergeant Johnson started to respond, but Maya stepped forward before he could speak. "That would be me, sir." Colonel Hayes studied Maya with the kind of attention that suggested he was processing more than just her words. His eyes moved from her face to her uniform, taking in details that others had overlooked. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked. "Chen, sir. Maya Chen." Hayes continued his examination of Maya's uniform, and suddenly his expression changed dramatically. His eyes had fixed on something that made him take a step back in obvious surprise. "Those wings," he said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of recognition and disbelief. "Where did you get those wings?" For the first time since arriving at Camp Riverside, Maya's composed demeanor showed signs of tension. She glanced down at the small silver wings pinned above her left pocket, the same wings that everyone had dismissed as routine training awards. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're asking," she replied, though her voice carried a note of caution that suggested she knew exactly what Hayes had recognized. Colonel Hayes stepped closer, studying the wings with the kind of attention that comes from personal familiarity with military decorations. When he looked back at Maya's face, his expression had shifted to something approaching awe. "Son of a gun," he said quietly. "You're one of them." Colonel Hayes's recognition of Maya's wings created a moment of electric tension that seemed to freeze time itself. Staff Sergeant Johnson, Corporal Mitchell, and the rest of the team found themselves watching an exchange they didn't understand but could sense was monumentally significant. The small silver wings that everyone had dismissed as routine training decorations had apparently identified Maya as something extraordinary. "Sir, with respect, I think there might be some confusion," Maya said carefully, though her body language suggested she was preparing for a conversation she had hoped to avoid. Colonel Hayes stepped even closer, his eyes fixed on the wings with an intensity that made it clear he knew exactly what he was looking at. "There's no confusion, soldier. Those are shadow reconnaissance wings. I've only seen them twice in my 30-year career, and both times they were worn by people who officially don't exist." The revelation hit his teammates like a physical blow. Shadow reconnaissance was a designation that existed in whispered conversations and classified briefings, but none of them had ever expected to encounter someone who had actually earned those wings. The program was so secretive that most soldiers weren't even sure it was real. "Shadow Recon?" Private Torres whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not possible." Colonel Hayes heard the comment and turned to address the entire team. Shadow reconnaissance is the military's most classified special operations program. Personnel are selected from the top 1% of Special Forces candidates and undergo training that makes Navy SEAL preparation like summer camp. Their missions are so sensitive that their existence is compromised at the highest levels of government. He gestured toward Maya, who stood perfectly still as her carefully maintained cover was systematically dismantled. "The wings indicate successful completion of the full Shadow Recon program, including operational deployments that are classified beyond your clearance levels. There are fewer than 50 people in the world authorized to wear those wings." Staff Sergeant Johnson felt his understanding of reality shifting as he processed this information. The gentle woman who had been feeding birds and speaking in whispers was apparently one of the most elite soldiers in the entire military. Every assumption he had made about Maya Chen was not just wrong, it was spectacularly, impossibly wrong. "Maya," he said slowly, "is this true?" Maya looked at Johnson, then at the rest of her team, her expression revealing the internal struggle between operational security and personal relationships. For weeks, she had maintained her cover through careful behavior and calculated responses, but Colonel Hayes's recognition had made continued deception impossible. "The program is classified," she said finally. "I can't discuss operational details." "But you can confirm your participation," Hayes said, making it clear this wasn't a request. "Given the current security situation, I'm authorizing disclosure of your status to this team." Maya took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to briefing senior military officials. "Yes, sir. I am a graduate of the Shadow Reconnaissance Program. My assignment to Camp Riverside was part of a controlled cover operation." The admission created a cascade of realizations among her teammates as they began recontextualizing every interaction they'd had with Maya. Her exceptional marksmanship, her terrain reading abilities, her tactical expertise, all of it suddenly made perfect sense within the framework of elite special operations training. "Cover operation for what?" Corporal Mitchell asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Colonel Hayes answered before Maya could respond. "There have been security concerns about Camp Riverside for several months. Intelligence suggested possible infiltration by hostile forces or compromise of sensitive information. Maya was inserted to conduct covert assessment of base security and personnel. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Maya hadn't been assigned to Camp Riverside as a regular soldier. She had been investigating them. Every conversation, every training exercise, every moment of apparent vulnerability had been part of a sophisticated intelligence operation. "You were spying on us," Private Kim said, his voice carrying a mixture of betrayal and awe. Maya's response revealed the complexity of her position and the personal cost of maintaining such deep cover. "I was protecting you. The intelligence we received suggested that someone at Camp Riverside was providing information to hostile forces. My mission was to identify the security breach and neutralize the threat." Her explanation helped contextualize her behavior over the previous weeks. The quiet observation, the careful questions, the way she had positioned herself to watch everything and everyone, it hadn't been social awkwardness or gentle curiosity. It had been professional surveillance conducted by someone trained to gather intelligence without detection. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Staff Sergeant Johnson asked. Maya's expression darkened as she considered how much operational information she could safely share. The investigation identified several security vulnerabilities and at least one confirmed case of information sharing with unauthorized personnel. The capture operation we just completed was directly related to intelligence that originated from Camp Riverside. The weight of this revelation settled over the team as they realized that Maya's presence at their base had been part of a larger counterintelligence operation. The high-value target they had just captured was connected to security breaches at their own facility. Colonel Hayes stepped forward to provide additional context that helped explain the full scope of the situation. "The individual you captured today had been receiving classified information about training schedules, personnel movements, and security protocols from someone inside Camp Riverside. Maya's investigation identified the source and allowed us to set up today's operation." "Someone at our base was selling secrets?" Torres asked, her voice reflecting the betrayal that every soldier feels when confronted with treason in their ranks. "Someone at your base was compromising the safety of every person stationed there," Maya replied, her professional demeanor not quite masking the personal anger she felt about the betrayal. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of additional helicopters carrying military police and intelligence personnel who would handle the secure transport of the captured target. As these officials took charge of the prisoner and began collecting evidence from the engagement site, Colonel Hayes pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. "Your cover is blown now," he said quietly. "The team knows who you are, and word will spread throughout the base within hours." Maya nodded, having anticipated this consequence from the moment Hayes recognized her wings. "I understand, sir. I'm prepared for reassignment." "Actually, I have a different proposition," Hayes said, glancing toward Maya's teammates who were still processing the revelations about her true identity. "How would you feel about staying at Camp Riverside in an official capacity?" The suggestion surprised Maya, who had expected to be extracted immediately once her cover was compromised. "Sir?" "Your investigation identified serious security problems that need ongoing attention. More importantly, your demonstrated ability to work with this team suggests you might be more effective in an open advisory role than as a covert operative." Maya considered the proposition while watching her teammates. Staff Sergeant Johnson was studying their tactical maps with a new understanding of how Maya had developed such sophisticated operational plans. Corporal Mitchell was examining his own equipment with the kind of attention that suggested he was reconsidering everything he thought he knew about military tactics. The other team members were engaged in quiet conversations that mixed excitement with apprehension about working with someone of Maya's capabilities. "They trusted me when they thought I was just another soldier," Maya said. "That dynamic will change now." "Maybe," Hayes acknowledged. "Or maybe they'll realize that having someone with your training and experience on their team is the best thing that could happen to them." The conversation was interrupted when Staff Sergeant Johnson approached with a question that had been bothering him since the revelation about Maya's background. Ma'am, I mean, Maya, what's your actual rank? Maya smiled slightly at the confusion in Johnson's voice. The question of rank was complicated in special operations, where traditional military hierarchy often took a backseat to operational effectiveness and specialized expertise. Technically, I'm a major, she replied, but Shadow Recon personnel operate outside normal command structures. For the purposes of this assignment, I was authorized to function at whatever rank level was necessary to maintain operational effectiveness. The revelation that Maya outranked everyone on the team, including Staff Sergeant Johnson, created another wave of cognitive dissonance. She had spent weeks following orders and deferring to the judgment of soldiers who were technically her subordinates. "You've been taking orders from us," Mitchell said, clearly struggling with the implications. "Why?" "Because effective intelligence gathering requires understanding how organizations function naturally. If I had asserted authority based on rank, I would have changed the dynamics I was trying to observe. Sometimes the best way to understand a system is to function within it as a regular participant." Colonel Hayes watched this exchange with interest, recognizing that Maya's explanation revealed sophisticated understanding of both intelligence operations and human psychology. Her ability to maintain character while gathering critical information demonstrated exactly why Shadow Recon personnel are so highly valued. "There's another factor you should consider," Hayes said, addressing the team as a whole. "Maya's investigation isn't complete. While we've identified and captured one source of information leakage, there may be additional security vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Having her continue working with this team would allow us to maintain security while completing the assessment." The proposition created a unique situation where Maya would transition from covert operative to open advisor, working with soldiers who now knew her true capabilities but were still processing the implications of that knowledge. Private Torres was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "So what happens now? Do we pretend the last few weeks didn't happen? Do we start calling you Major? How does this work?" Maya's response revealed both her professional pragmatism and her genuine concern for the personal relationships she had developed during her time at Camp Riverside. "What happens now is that we figure out how to work together with all the cards on the table. I'm still the same person who's been working alongside you for the past few weeks. The only difference is that now you understand why I was able to contribute in certain ways." "The same person who's been holding back her real capabilities?" Johnson pointed out, though his tone suggested curiosity rather than accusation. "The same person who's been doing her job," Maya corrected gently. "My mission required gathering information through observation and building relationships with base personnel. Everything I did was in service of protecting the people stationed at Camp Riverside." Colonel Hayes checked his watch and realized that the debriefing process was going to take several more hours. "I'm going to leave Maya here to begin the transition process. Her new assignment will be announced officially within the next 24 hours, but for now, consider her your team's Special Operations Advisor." As Hayes departed with the prisoner transport, Maya found herself alone with the team that had known her as a gentle, soft-spoken soldier and now had to adjust to understanding her as one of the most elite operatives. The conversation that followed would determine whether the trust and camaraderie they had built over the previous weeks could survive the revelation of who Maya Chen really was. The silence that followed Colonel Hayes' departure was unlike anything the team had experienced together. 7 soldiers sat in a rough circle on the desert ground, each processing the revelation that the person they had considered the softest member of their unit was actually one of the most lethal operatives in the entire military. The psychological adjustment required was staggering, and the tension was palpable. Staff Sergeant Johnson was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and uncertainty. "So, Major Chen, what exactly do we do now?" Maya noticed the formal address and understood the complexity it represented. Johnson was acknowledging her superior rank while simultaneously expressing the awkwardness of their reversed roles over the previous weeks. She had been taking his orders, following his lead, and deferring to his experience, all while technically being his commanding officer. First, let's address the rank issue, Maya said, settling into a more comfortable position that suggested this conversation would take time. For operational purposes, I recommend we continue functioning as we have been. Staff Sergeant Johnson has been leading this team effectively, and changing that dynamic now would create unnecessary complications. Her suggestion revealed a sophisticated understanding of military psychology and team dynamics. Asserting her technical authority would undermine the relationships and trust that had been built over weeks of shared experiences, potentially making the team less effective rather than more capable. "But you outrank all of us," Private Torres pointed out. "Doesn't that change everything?" Maya's response demonstrated the flexibility that made elite special operations personnel so valuable in complex situations. Rank is a tool for organizing military units and ensuring clear command authority. In this case, that tool would interfere with our mission effectiveness. I'm authorized to operate at whatever rank level best serves operational requirements. Corporal Mitchell had been quiet during this exchange, but his question revealed deeper concerns about the implications of Maya's revelations. How much of what we thought we knew about you was real? The gentleness, the concern for others, the way you helped that injured bird, was any of that actually you? The question struck at the heart of Maya's personal struggle with maintaining deep cover while forming genuine relationships. Her answer would determine whether the team could move forward with trust or would always wonder about her authenticity. "Everything you observed about my personality was real," she said, her voice carrying the same soft quality that had characterized her interactions for weeks. "Shadow recon training doesn't change who you are as a person. It teaches you how to use all aspects of your personality as operational tools." She paused, choosing her words carefully as she navigated the boundary between personal revelation and operational security. "The gentleness you observed is genuine. I do care about injured animals and people's welfare. The difference is that I've also been trained to use those characteristics to build relationships and gather information when necessary." Private Kim raised a practical concern that had been bothering him since the revelation. "If you've been watching us this whole time, what did you learn? Are we in trouble?" Maya's expression softened as she addressed the team's anxiety about being under investigation. "You learned that this team has the kind of integrity and competence that makes me proud to serve alongside you. My investigation focused on security vulnerabilities and potential information leaks, not on evaluating individual soldiers' performance." Her reassurance helped ease some of the tension, but Specialist Walsh raised another issue that needed addressing. "What about the security breach you mentioned? Someone at our base was selling information. Do we know who?" Maya's response revealed information that had been classified until the day's successful capture operation. The investigation identified Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb from the communications section. He had been providing training schedules, patrol routes, and personnel information to the individual we captured today. The revelation that someone they all knew had been compromising their safety created a different kind of shock. Webb had been a familiar figure around Camp Riverside, someone they had trusted with sensitive information and considered a reliable member of their military community. "Webb?" Johnson said, his voice reflecting disbelief. "I've known him for 3 years. He helped me set up communications for a dozen training exercises, which gave him access to exactly the kind of information that hostile forces need to plan attacks. His position in communications allowed him to observe patterns in training schedules, identify when units would be vulnerable, and track personnel movements throughout the region." The team spent several minutes processing this betrayal by someone they had considered trustworthy. The psychological impact of discovering treason within their own ranks was significant, and Maya recognized that helping them work through these feelings was important for maintaining unit cohesion. "How long were you suspicious of Webb?" Torres asked. Maya's answer revealed the methodical nature of her investigation and the personal cost of maintaining suspicion while building relationships. The initial intelligence that led to my assignment suggested information leakage from communications personnel, but I couldn't focus solely on that section without compromising the investigation. I had to evaluate everyone with access to sensitive information. "Including us," Mitchell said, understanding the implications. Including everyone, Maya confirmed. The most effective way to identify security vulnerabilities is to observe how information flows through an organization naturally. That required becoming part of the community and watching how people interact with classified material. Private Thompson, who had been listening quietly, raised a question that revealed his concern about ongoing security. Are there others? Could Webb have been working with additional personnel? Maya's professional assessment provided both reassurance and caution. The investigation found no evidence of additional compromise, but security is an ongoing concern. Webb's capture should eliminate the immediate threat, but maintaining vigilance will be important for preventing future breaches. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a military police vehicle carrying Captain Sarah Martinez, who had been briefed on the day's developments and was arriving to address the team's new operational status. Her presence signaled that Maya's transition from covert operative to official advisor was about to become formal. "I understand congratulations are in order," Martinez said as she approached the group. "You've successfully captured a high-value target and identified a significant security breach." Her tone suggested pride in the team's performance, but also awareness that the revelation about Maya's background had created complications that needed to be addressed officially. "Major Chen," Martinez continued, addressing Maya with her correct rank for the first time, "I've received orders regarding your new assignment status. You're being officially attached to this unit as Special Operations Advisor, with full authority to modify training protocols and security procedures as necessary." The formal assignment clarified Maya's role while maintaining the team structure that had proven effective. She would be working with the unit openly, but with enhanced authority to implement improvements based on her specialized training and investigation findings. "What does that mean for our normal operations?" Johnson asked. Martinez's response outlined changes that would transform the team's capabilities while building on their existing strengths. "Your unit is being redesignated as a Special Operations Support Team with enhanced training requirements and expanded mission parameters. Major Chen will be implementing advanced tactical training based on current special operations protocols." The redesignation represented a significant upgrade in the team's status and responsibilities, reflecting both their demonstrated competence and the value of having Maya's expertise available for ongoing operations. "We're going to be doing special ops missions?" Walsh asked, her voice mixing excitement with apprehension. Maya answered before Martinez could respond, her tone reflecting both the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. "You're going to be prepared to support special operations missions when required. That means advanced training in areas like electronic warfare, advanced reconnaissance, and specialized tactical procedures." The prospect of enhanced training was exciting, but it also represented a significant increase in the demands placed on each team member. Maya's standards would be based on special operations requirements rather than conventional infantry expectations. "How advanced?" Torres asked, clearly interested in pushing her own capabilities. Maya's smile suggested that the team was about to discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. "You've already demonstrated the basic competencies during this week's operations. We'll be building on those foundations to develop skills that will make you effective in environments where conventional tactics aren't sufficient." Captain Martinez provided additional context that helped explain the strategic importance of the team's new role. "Intelligence indicates that the security threats we've been dealing with are part of a larger pattern of hostile activity in this region. Having a team with special operations capabilities will be critical for addressing future threats." The briefing continued with Martinez outlining administrative changes that would accompany the team's new status: enhanced security clearances, specialized equipment, and modified living arrangements that would support their expanded responsibilities. "You'll be moving to Barracks Alpha," Martinez announced. "Enhanced security protocols, private briefing rooms, and access to classified communications equipment." The physical move to better facilities represented the military's recognition of the team's elevated status, but it also meant leaving behind the community they had known at Camp Riverside. As Martinez departed to handle the administrative aspects of their transition, Maya found herself alone again with the team that would now be under her official guidance. The dynamic had shifted significantly from their earlier conversation, but important questions remained about how they would function together. "So, what's our first training priority?" Johnson asked, accepting his new role as Maya's senior enlisted advisor. Maya's response revealed her understanding of the team's current capabilities and the areas where improvement would yield the greatest operational benefits. Electronic warfare and counter-surveillance. Today's mission showed that you have solid tactical fundamentals, but future operations will require dealing with more sophisticated threats. She began outlining a training program that would challenge each team member while building on their individual strengths. Advanced marksmanship for Torres, expanded communications training for Kim, enhanced medical capabilities for Walsh, and leadership development for Johnson and Mitchell. "What about physical training?" Thompson asked, clearly concerned about meeting special operations fitness standards. "Physical preparation will be important," Maya acknowledged, "but mental preparation will be more critical. Special operations success depends on making correct decisions under extreme stress, often with incomplete information and no time for consultation." Her explanation helped the team understand that their enhanced training would focus on developing judgment and adaptation rather than just physical capabilities. The mental toughness required for special operations was different from conventional military training, emphasizing problem-solving and innovation over following predetermined procedures. As the sun began setting over the desert landscape, Maya looked at each team member individually, seeing both their current capabilities and their potential for growth. The gentle woman who had arrived at Camp Riverside weeks earlier was still there, but she coexisted with the professional operator who would guide their development into something extraordinary. "Tomorrow we start a new chapter," she said quietly, "but we started together, building on the trust and competence you've already demonstrated." The team that had once thought Maya Chen was too soft for military service was about to discover what she could help them become when they stopped holding back and started reaching for their full potential. 6 months after Maya's identity was revealed, Camp Riverside had transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the soldiers who had first dismissed her as too soft for military service. The Special Operations Support Team that emerged from those desert revelations had become one of the most effective units in the entire regional command, and their reputation was spreading throughout the military's Special Operations community. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first weeks after Maya's official appointment as Special Operations Advisor had been challenging, as the team adjusted to training standards that pushed every individual far beyond their previous limits. But the results spoke for themselves in ways that even skeptics couldn't ignore. Staff Sergeant Johnson stood in the enhanced briefing room of Barracks Alpha, studying satellite imagery on high-definition monitors that represented the kind of technology previously reserved for elite Special Forces units. The intelligence briefing he was preparing would have been impossible 6 months ago, both because his team lacked the clearance to access such sensitive information and because they didn't possess the analytical skills to interpret it effectively. "Target appears to be using the warehouse complex as a staging area for weapon smuggling operations," he reported to Maya, who was reviewing electronic surveillance data at an adjacent workstation. Johnson's briefing demonstrated the dramatic improvement in his analytical capabilities that had resulted from months of intensive training under Maya's guidance. He was processing multiple intelligence sources simultaneously, identifying patterns that revealed operational vulnerabilities, and developing tactical recommendations that reflected sophisticated understanding of enemy psychology and logistics. Maya listened to his assessment while simultaneously monitoring radio intercepts that provided real-time intelligence about the target. Her ability to process multiple information streams while maintaining situational awareness had become one of the team's most valuable capabilities. But more importantly, she had successfully taught similar skills to her team members. "Excellent analysis," she said, though her tone suggested this level of competence had become routine rather than exceptional. "What's your recommendation for approach routes?" Johnson's response revealed the extent to which Maya's training had enhanced his tactical thinking. Instead of proposing conventional assault options, he had developed a plan that incorporated electronic warfare, psychological operations, and advanced reconnaissance techniques that would have impressed special operations planners at the highest levels.
"Primary approach through the drainage system we identified during reconnaissance last week," he said, pointing to terrain features on the satellite imagery. "The secondary team establishes observation posts here and here to monitor communications and provide early warning of reinforcements."
The plan incorporated lessons learned from their previous operations, while demonstrating creativity and attention to detail that reflected months of intensive development. Johnson had evolved from a competent infantry leader into someone capable of planning complex special operations missions. Private Torres entered the briefing room carrying equipment that would have seemed like science fiction to conventional infantry soldiers. Electronic surveillance devices, specialized communications gear, and weapon systems that required extensive training to operate effectively. Her transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all team members. Electronic reconnaissance confirms 3 distinct radio networks operating from the target location, she reported, setting up monitoring equipment with practiced efficiency. Primary network appears to be coordination between facility security. The secondary network is handling logistics communication with external supply sources. The third network is encrypted and likely used for command communications with higher-level organizations. Torres had discovered an aptitude for electronic warfare that surprised even Maya. Her natural aggressiveness had been channeled into mastering systems that could disable enemy communications, intercept sensitive transmissions, and coordinate friendly forces with unprecedented precision. Any success with decryption, Maya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Partial success with the logistics network, Torres replied with obvious satisfaction. Enough to confirm timing of the next shipment and identify 3 additional facilities involved in the distribution network. The breakthrough represented weeks of dedicated work with encryption techniques that were taught only in the most advanced military intelligence schools. Torres had mastered capabilities that placed her among the most skilled electronic warfare specialists in the entire military. Corporal Mitchell appeared in the briefing room doorway, having returned from a reconnaissance mission that would have challenged experienced Special Forces operatives. His uniform showed signs of extended field operations, but his bearing reflected the confidence that came from successfully completing missions that had once seemed impossible. "Perimeter reconnaissance complete," he announced, approaching the tactical display with movements that had acquired the unconscious efficiency of a professional operator. Identified 2 additional security positions that weren't visible on satellite imagery, plus what appears to be an underground tunnel system connecting the main facility to a secondary location approximately 2 kilometers east. Mitchell's reconnaissance report demonstrated fieldcraft skills that rivaled those of special operations veterans with years of experience. His ability to gather detailed intelligence while remaining undetected had become one of the team's most reliable capabilities. Underground connections changed the tactical picture significantly, Maya observed, studying the new information. Recommendations? Simultaneous operations against both facilities, Mitchell replied without hesitation. If we hit the primary location without securing the secondary site, we risk losing critical personnel and evidence through the tunnel system. His tactical assessment revealed the kind of strategic thinking that separated professional operators from conventional soldiers. Mitchell was considering not just immediate mission requirements, but the broader implications of their actions on follow-up operations and long-term intelligence gathering. Specialist Walsh and Private Kim arrived together, having completed the medical and communications preparations that had become their specialized responsibilities. The coordination between team members had evolved to levels that made their previous cooperation seem amateurish by comparison. Medical support package configured for extended operations, Walsh reported. Advanced trauma capabilities, chemical exposure countermeasures, and field surgical equipment if required for casualty evacuation. Her medical training had expanded far beyond basic military first aid, to include procedures that were typically performed only by specialized military physicians. Walsh could now handle medical emergencies that would have required immediate evacuation in their previous operational capacity. Communications package includes encrypted satellite links, electronic warfare countermeasures, and backup systems for maintaining contact if primary networks are compromised, Kim added, setting up equipment that represented the cutting edge of military communications technology. Kim's expertise with advanced communication systems had made him invaluable for operations that required coordination with multiple units and real-time intelligence sharing. His capabilities had evolved to the point where he could establish communications in environments where conventional military radios were ineffective. Private Thompson completed the team's arrival, carrying specialized weapons and equipment that reflected their enhanced operational status. His role as heavy weapons specialist had expanded to include capabilities that could provide fire support for complex special operations missions. Weapon systems checked and configured for urban environment operations, he reported. Specialized ammunition for minimizing collateral damage while maintaining effectiveness against hardened targets. Thompson's weapons expertise now included systems that were typically assigned only to special operations units. His understanding of ballistics, target effects, and tactical applications had been enhanced through training that placed him among the most capable weapons specialists in the military. Maya looked around the briefing room at the team that had evolved from conventional infantry soldiers into special operations professionals. The transformation had been remarkable, but more importantly, it had been achieved while maintaining the personal relationships and mutual trust that made them effective as a unit. "Final mission briefing at 1800 hours," she announced. "This operation will demonstrate everything you've learned over the past 6 months." The upcoming mission represented the culmination of their training and development. Intelligence had identified a major weapons smuggling operation that posed significant threats to regional security. The complexity of the target and the sensitive nature of the intelligence required capabilities that only a few military units possessed. But Maya knew that her team was ready. They had evolved beyond the conventional soldiers who had once questioned whether she belonged in their ranks. They had become something extraordinary. As the team dispersed to complete their individual preparations, Staff Sergeant Johnson lingered in the briefing room to address something that had been on his mind for weeks. "Maya," he said, using the informal address that had become natural despite her superior rank, "I need to apologize for how we treated you when you first arrived." Maya looked up from the intelligence reports she was reviewing, her expression carrying the same gentleness that had characterized her 6 months earlier. "There's nothing to apologize for. You responded to what you observed, which was exactly what good soldiers should do." "We called you too soft," Johnson said, his voice reflecting genuine regret. "We had no idea what we were talking about." Maya's response revealed the complexity of her character that had made her such an effective undercover operative and such a valuable team leader. "I am soft, in many ways. The kindness you observed was real. The concern for others was genuine. Shadow Recon training doesn't eliminate those characteristics, it teaches you how to use them effectively." She gestured toward the advanced equipment and mission plans that surrounded them. "Everything we've accomplished together has been built on the foundation of trust and mutual respect that we established during those first weeks. The softness you observed was part of what made this transformation possible." Johnson studied her thoughtfully, understanding finally that Maya's gentleness and her lethal capabilities weren't contradictory characteristics, they were complementary aspects of a personality that had been shaped by the most demanding training in the military. "The bird you helped," he said, remembering one of his first impressions of Maya. "You still do things like that." "More than before," Maya replied with a slight smile. "Having the capability to handle extreme situations makes it easier to appreciate small acts of kindness. Knowing I can protect people when necessary allows me to focus on helping them in everyday ways." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Hayes, who had returned to observe the team's final mission briefing. His presence indicated the significance of the upcoming operation and the recognition that Maya's team had earned at the highest levels of command. "Major Chen," he said formally, though his tone carried the warmth of someone who had watched their remarkable development. "I wanted to personally review your team's operational plan before authorizing the mission." Maya stood and gestured toward the tactical displays that showed their comprehensive analysis of the target and detailed operational planning. "Sir, we're ready to brief whenever convenient." Colonel Hayes spent the next hour reviewing their mission plan with the kind of attention typically reserved for operations conducted by the most elite Special Forces units. The complexity of their planning, the sophistication of their intelligence analysis, and the precision of their tactical coordination exceeded expectations for a team that had been conventional infantry soldiers just months earlier. "Outstanding work," he said finally. "This operation is approved for execution tomorrow night." As Colonel Hayes prepared to leave, he paused to address the entire team with words that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "You've become something extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying genuine pride. "When this operation succeeds, and I have no doubt it will, you'll have proven that the combination of exceptional training, dedicated leadership, and outstanding individual commitment can transform good soldiers into elite operators." After Hayes departed, Maya gathered her team for a final informal discussion before the next day's mission. The atmosphere was relaxed but focused, reflecting the confidence that came from months of intensive preparation and successful operations. "Tomorrow night will be our most challenging mission," she said quietly, "but it will also be our most important. The intelligence we gather and the disruption we cause will prevent weapons from reaching people who would use them to harm innocent civilians." She looked at each team member individually, seeing not just their current capabilities, but the personal growth that had accompanied their professional development. "6 months ago, people said I was too soft for military service. Tonight, you're preparing for a special operations mission that will protect lives and serve national security interests. The transformation you've achieved proves that with the right training and dedication, any limitations can be overcome." Torres spoke for the entire team when she said, "We wouldn't be here without your guidance. Thank you for seeing what we could become." Maya's response captured the essence of what had made their transformation possible. "I didn't change who you were. I helped you discover capabilities you already possessed but hadn't been challenged to develop. The strength was always there. It just needed the right circumstances to emerge." As the team completed their final preparations for the next day's mission, Maya stood alone in the briefing room, studying the tactical displays that represented months of hard work and dedication. The gentlewoman who had arrived at Camp Riverside was still there, but she coexisted with the professional operator who had guided 7 soldiers through a transformation that had exceeded everyone's expectations. The small silver wings on her uniform caught the light from the overhead displays, no longer a mystery, but a symbol of the extraordinary capabilities that could emerge when talent met opportunity and dedication met challenge. Tomorrow's mission will be another success, but more importantly, it would be another step in the ongoing journey of soldiers who had learned that being called too soft was often just another way of saying not yet challenged enough to show what they're truly capable of. The story that had begun with dismissal and underestimation had become one of recognition and achievement. And Maya Chen, the woman they had once thought too gentle for military service, had proven that sometimes the most important strength comes not from being hard, but from being strong enough to remain gentle while handling the hardest challenges life can offer. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.